So welcome to our first Blue Table Talk. My name is Kristen Newton. I'm the marketing director here at PMR. I'm joined by my colleagues, Melissa Sullivan, Director of Supplier Services, Cliff Hope, Senior Account Manager, as well as Matthew Arminio, Account Manager. And we're going to be talking about converter controls today, converter inventory controls. So just to jump into it, Cliff, do you want to just explain old processes as well as the pros and cons of the old processes concerning converter inventory controls?
Absolutely. So in my time working in the converter industry, many of the suppliers that I've worked with start out with a tick mark on a box pattern where converters are being harvested or purchased and they're going into Gaylord boxes or into a storage facility. And really they've got, the control mechanism is somebody putting a tick mark on a box or on a piece of paper. And those counts typically don't match when they actually get into our facilities for counting. So it doesn't give a really clear idea of what's happening. So really the cons are not knowing what they've got prior to sending them out. I don't know what everybody else's experience is with that, but I gotta say, a lot of times the suppliers that have come on or onboarded with us just aren't sure of what they're shipping out, and it takes some time to get them used to a new pattern.
And Matthew, just based on your experience, would you say that you've had a lot of suppliers that follow the tick mark on the box, and once it arrives here, we grade it out, it's not really identical to what they thought that they had shipped in?
I think a lot of businesses, when they start out dealing with us, they're used to using the old tick method. And yeah, for sure, they're not used to having a really accurate count. They tell me, oh, you have 250, and I'm like, okay, 250 of what? What's in your box? And then we get their boxes, and it could be plus or minus. And the more they get used to dealing with us and using our systems, they're able to really nail down what the material is and how to keep track of their counts much more accurately.
So what would be the pros of this old system? If you had to list a couple of it, what would you...
You really don't have to train anybody to do a tick mark on a box. It's just it's a one-for-one kind of count. And so the next part of that would be you don't have to train anybody about knowing what kind of cats they're dealing with. So
it's a simplified process.
It's simple, and a lot of let's say facility owners aren't really interested in educating anybody about the value of converters that's working on their floor. And there's nothing.
It does take time to educate people.
Absolutely, and we're dealing with a high value product here, so they don't really want to be exposed to potential thefts or just mismanagement of the product. Melissa?
Yeah, I think one of the other pros would be that it's quick.
Absolutely.
You're handling the converter, it's one touch, you put it in the box, you put the tick on the side, and you move on. So there's that, it's easy, it's quick, it's fluid.
Yeah. So on the flip side, and why we're here today, what would be the cons of this old process, this old system that people seem to be following, today?
The largest con is that you just don't know what you have before it ships out. So if you don't have track of your material separations, and when I say that, I mean how many aftermarkets are in those boxes, how many foil converters, how many regular OEMs, and what's changing month to month. Because a lot of times suppliers, really when they're dealing in converters before they're working with us, can't nail down what happened in converters last month. And really it's different mixtures every month, and if they don't have a trace of what they're actually harvesting or purchasing for that matter, then it's very difficult to nail down what they're going to get. And if you're letting somebody else tell you that in advance of the product leaving, you're really at the mercy of whomever you're dealing with.
And to just add to what Cliff said, when you have tick sheets on a box, you don't have any real handle or type of analysis on what you're sending out before you ship it. You have no basis for comparison from what you shipped versus what's been processed, and there's a lot to be said for the comfort of doing things the way they've always been done. But there's a reason these new methods exist. And
so now that you mentioned new methods, what is the solutioning to these cons, right? What are those new methods? What do we need to focus on? So, Melissa, do you want to start off in terms of what we should be, what the education process is in the solutioning?
Sure. So I think the first place to start is to really understand what you have before you ship it. So separating out your material in a way that allows you to know month over month what you had this month versus last month in each different category of material.
Absolutely, because different purchasing patterns, or let's say this: when vehicles are purchased and brought in for decommissioning, the converter's harvested. Now, purchasing in a given area might give some consistency in the results of the OE converters that are coming off of those vehicles, but you're going to have variations in those converters being all OE, or what the percentages are of aftermarkets, what the percentages are of foil. And our experience shows that this does change month to month and will really impact what expectations should be. In fact, when we're going through our inventory process here, we often count more material coming through the door than is anticipated. One might think that's a good thing, where a new customer will say, well, my overall average is lower. Well, you sent more than you thought you were sending. There are actually more types of material separation than you had. If you can get a handle of that before it actually leaves your facility, those questions stop coming up.
And what do you mean when you say material separation? Can you just break that concept down?
Absolutely. So as a refiner, we see material as distinct types. So we'll start with OE converters. They're the most valuable piece that's coming off of an automobile. And that OE has, once again, two other material types. You've got ceramic and you've got foil. Foil represents roughly 5% of the converter market. Yeah, exactly. And so the other 95% of what's coming off of a vehicle that has the original converters on it going to be ceramic. They're processed differently. They're seen differently, and unless there's training or unless you have some way to evaluate them, it's difficult to just understand that 5% should be present, and it will vary up and down month to month as you harvest different vehicles.
Okay, so from what's been said, Melissa and Cliff, you need to know your unit count, but more than that, you need to know what your material separation is. So after material separation, after unit count, what's left? What else do we need to look at in terms of new solutioning methods, how you're keeping track of your converter inventory? Matthew, do you want to add to that? I'm thinking facility separation, right? If it's a multi-yard facility, so thinking that
you can track the each location. If you have multiple locations, it allows you to have visibility on. If you're a manager or an owner of a company and you have 4 yards, you're not going to be at every single yard buying converters. Being able to maintain visibility on what each yard is pulling, what they're buying, and being able to track the values up and down based on the method of acquisition is going to help you really get a better handle on what you're bringing in versus what you're sending out.
Okay, so when we're talking and thinking about converter inventory controls, it goes beyond unit count. We've discussed material separation, knowing OEM, the type of OEM. Is it ceramic? Is it foil? Are you sending, how much percentage is aftermarkets? How much percentage is, diesel material? Then Matthew elaborated on facility separation, right? So if you're a multi-yard, how many converters, come out of each yard? What is the aftermarket percentage of each yard? Cliff, do you want to add to the multi-yard, multi-facility separation?
Well, what this does is it sets up a number of, I'm going to say, real positive directions. First off, just the material security. So if you're able to monitor the percentages, and there's going to be changes month in, month out, if there are spikes that don't look right, you can actually drill down into a facility and make sure that there's not something fishy going on. I mean, we all have the story of somebody that had an employee, and it's unfortunate that it happens with these high value goods. It happens, and so we need to be realistic about that. So the next part of this notion of keeping your inventory control is to have a real record of it, and the best way we've found to bring that forward is a photograph. Photographs are lasting. It's a good evidence. And as a processor, we're able to very quickly help our suppliers, at least, with that visual record and identifiable value prior to it ever leaving the yard.
Yeah. So that it creates accountability in each yard.
Absolutely.
And sorry, I just want to elaborate or build a little bit on that. I think from calling all over the country, one thing I'm finding is that the laws are changing from state to state. There's more interaction with law enforcement. There's more tracking from law enforcement based on what we're buying. Looking for stolen converters. Being able to point to a picture from a whole load and pull out anything that needs to be dissected or looked at more in depth allows you to have a lot more peace of mind that you've got a record that you can present to law enforcement as needed and see which yard did it come from.
The ease and transparency
exactly.
of a system.
And law enforcement really appreciates that kind of activity from the yard's perspective. Like, if you're able to say, this person came in on this day and sold us this converter. Now you've done your due diligence in sourcing that piece. They've got their records. You've got what they told you that it came from and how they acquired it. Now you've got the record that they were there and they sold you this piece. Law enforcement doesn't want the piece back. It's gone. It's been recycled. But what they do want is to have
proof, evidence,
proof, and they
some
can
sort
now
of
go back to
tracking.
that individual and they can arrest them and they can put them away. And that's really going to be something that stops the ongoing cycle, the news cycle that we see. That really does represent a small percentage. But if we can make it more accountable with our tools, I think that's really a positive.
And I think that is a big part of converter inventory controls is figuring out how to have that accountability and make sure that you feel secure and safe and knowing that you're doing everything that you can to make sure that you're following the protocol of your state. So I think the last part of it is acquisition of these converters, right? Because we have a lot of recyclers that are not only pulling these off their cars, right? They are purchasing them. So, Melissa, would you want to elaborate on the last type of, separation being acquisition, understanding pulled versus purchased and going through that?
For sure. So I think as, new suppliers come on board with us, one of the things that they're, not used to doing is separating the converters by what they're buying at the door or at the scale versus what they're pulling off cars that they've bought. And just to go back to what we were talking about, responsible sourcing, if you're separating out that material, you know that this is the things I've purchased at the door and at the scale versus, inventory that I've bought at auction or whatever the case may be. So you have better control to know who are the people coming in to sell you those converters repeatedly. And if you do have an inquiry that needs to be followed up on, you've already separated that material out as well. Not only that, it's good to track the profitability of what you're buying at the door versus what you're buying as a full vehicle and dismantling.
Because I think that's another disadvantage of the old system of a tick mark on a box is if you're mixing all your material together in terms of what you've pulled off the cars that you've bought versus what converters you've purchased at the door, you don't really understand how, you might be in the green, you might be in the red, but you won't understand where that green, where that red is coming from, right? Am I in the green because of the material that came off the cars, because of the material I've purchased and how I've purchased those converters, or is it because, of something different? We don't know that.
Well, we've had a lot of suppliers that had real awakenings and good ones. Not, we're not going to put this in a negative light. Being able to process what you're acquiring through purchase, either at door or even outsourcing some of those purchases, and not mixing that material with pulled, really does show those profit margins. And what I've found with any number of suppliers is that once that separation happens, and we have to discuss this in small lots too, because we also offer an ability through PMR to separate that and do smaller lot sizes. So when that mingling's not happening, you really get to see where your profit margins are. And the eye-opening parts were a lot of times those pulled converters were offsetting the losses because they were overpaying for material that they didn't realize.
Yeah. So sometimes you're in the green and it's a positive, but you don't know why you're in the green. You're just assuming it's
And in fact, you're actually in the red in this case when we talk about it that way. You're losing money that you don't have to, and having better inventory controls, and at our side of things, being able to give true feedback on that inventory really makes a big difference.
So to go back to Matthew's point, he said something before where, we're very comfortable staying in the same rhythm and doing the same things. So, what would you say is the biggest hurdle to adapting and taking on new methods? What would you say is the biggest hurdle for the average recycler today?
I would say it's anyone has difficulty or reluctance to learn something new. It is a very different way of doing business, and it does require a bit of an open mind. Most of the companies we deal with, they're business people. They want to do what's best for their company and their business. And sometimes that means stepping out of that comfort zone and trying something new that is going to help you get to the next level where you want to be in the future.
So we talked about two separate things in terms of new methods, new solutioning for converter inventory controls. We talked about knowing obviously your unit count as well as separation by material, separation by facility, separation by acquisition. So in your own words, Melissa, how would you define, why make those changes? Why move towards those changes? What are the benefits of making a change and getting out of your comfort zone, like Matthew says, and adapting to something new?
I think that one of the biggest benefits is that in the long run, once you make the change, you're going to have better insight. You're going to have historical results. You're going to know where you're going. You're going to be able to use additional tools to say, okay, based on my history, what am I going to get from this load that I'm putting together right now? And not only that, you have more control. So you're able to see, where is my material coming from? Where is my most profitable material coming from? What resources do I have assigned to that part of my converter operation? You're able to really make informed decisions throughout the whole buying and acquisition process, whether it be what you're buying at auction or what you might have somebody out on the road buying for you, or you might be buying, 3 or 4 different ways. You'll have a better line of sight on all of those different.
Yeah, for sure. So greater visibility across all your functions and operations in terms of converter.
Well, and let's say this, a greater opportunity, because I would suggest that there's a lot of auto recyclers out there that could be putting more of their converter revenues back into the purchasing of vehicles, because I think they're actually under-evaluating what's coming off of those vehicles and how to direct it properly, which overall, I mean, if the goal is to process more and to grow, knowing that you can put more of that converter profit back into the business and build it faster.
Yeah, and have more internal accountability for those profits and how you're using them, right?
Absolutely. And as far as adapting goes, I've seen it go both ways. I've seen where it's the leadership that brings in some changes, and it can be a struggle sometimes for people that have been in the industry for a while. But leadership really appreciates the viewpoint, and I've seen it go the other direction where it's actually the middle management and people that every day are having to answer questions about what's going on in the converters right now. They look to us for that kind of solution, so the management can see the overall picture, and they're actually freeing up a lot of time.
And just to kind of go again about what you talked about with the advantages, at the end of the day, it's about money. Everyone's in the business is to make money.
Yeah.
And doesn't it make sense to have as much information as possible about where your money is coming and going?
You need statistics, right? You need to be able to track the data and know what data you should be tracking in order to remain profitable. And the truth is that converters aren't like any other non-ferrous, right? You have to treat them differently. You have to manage them differently, and you have to, have the right tools in place to do that. And also with everything that we've discussed in terms of converter thefts and, responsible sourcing, you need to have the correct tools in doing that. So, if I had to ask a question, where would, if somebody is doing the old methods, they're putting the tick marks on the box, they're putting them converter by converter, tracking it by unit, and they wanted to do something completely different. They wanted to change, they're open to change, they're open to adapting. Where would they start? what is the first thing that they should be doing?
Well, they're going to look for a partner that's going to help them understand the material first. So anybody that's going to share information and help you with that type of material separation and understanding more is going to be the right partner to find. There's a lot of information, as you say, when it comes to converters. How do you learn that? Well, I mean, we've looked to make it as simple as possible, but ultimately anybody who's open and transparent in helping teach you and giving you tools that don't necessarily make everybody an expert on site, but give them the ability to have some basic knowledge.
So I guess if they started with that, like let's say I adopted that method and okay, you look for a partner that's able to give you the information that you need, that's able to give you the tools that you need to adapt to these new methods and take on these new solutions. What would they need internally? You know,
just the drive to do it really and make a change. Because I think that's the most important thing. At least from my perspective, new clients come at a time of need. They're showing up and they're looking for something different. They've probably been doing the tick method for a long time and they're just confused. They don't know, they can't answer what happened in converters last month. So are we able to deliver that solution? Well, that transparency is important.
and it comes down to like the main question, right? Like how you look at change. You either think it's going to help you or you think it's going to hurt you. And a lot of times we think it's going to hurt us because we're scared of the unknown, not knowing that a lot of the times the unknown is a lot better than what you thought it was going to be. And it brings you a lot of, progress. So, just closing out, is there anything that people should know in terms of, market needs with converter recycling, what they should be, taking on as a next step?
Well, I think one thing they always have to keep in mind is that the converter market is always changing. And being able to work with a company that is willing to help you navigate those changes.
And adapt as quickly as you need to adapt.
Exactly. And that's really going to help your business for as long as you stay in the business.
Okay, so I would thank you guys for being part of this Blue Table Talk today on converter inventory controls. If there's any questions related to this table talk or just questions in general related to converter recycling or converter inventory, you can feel free to reach us at info@pmrcc.com. And we'll be happy to take your questions. But in the meantime, we look forward to the next Blue Table Talk. And it was a great first kickoff.
It was.
Good job. Good job, team.